Director of Policy and Advocacy for the Climate Solutions Accelerator. Welcome to our New York State Policy and Advocacy training for those of you who will be taking action with us at the state level, primarily for the next 6 months. We have a busy legislative session coming up, and so we're glad that you are spending some time with us this evening to hone your knowledge and skills on the New York State policy process and also effective advocacy. I am joined tonight by two lovely humans who are some of our all-star policy volunteers. There's Sarah Mittiga, who you'll be hearing from in a little bit. And Katie Rigg is helping us with some backup. So if you have a question, please pop it into the chat. And we'll stop at the end of the section on policy, process, etc., and make sure that any questions are answered then. And so feel free to pop it in as you're thinking of it, and Katie will help manage that and make sure that we get to all of your questions. So I also want to make sure that people stay muted. It's totally fine if you're off camera. I won't, but make sure that you know, your name says who you are. I think I recognize everybody, but all that good stuff. Just make sure that you stay muted unless we have a question and answer period, if you would. And so to get ourselves started, please introduce yourself in the chat, and you can put in your name, pronoun, where you're zooming in from. I think probably most of us are in the Rochester area, but let us know where you're at right now, and let us know on a scale from 1 to 10 how comfortable you are in with speaking to policymakers. So 1 being super uncomfortable, and 10 being like you could talk to the president tomorrow about climate advocacy without batting an eye. So we'll get started with those introductions. And as you're putting them into the chat, I'm going to just go quickly over the agenda for tonight. So I will do a quick bit of level setting and then take you through, first of all, why policy change is something the Accelerator even does. And then we'll talk about policymakers in New York and the ones that are most relevant to our space, the climate space, and then give an overview of the policy process and timelines. I'll be using the example of the All-Electric Building Act, which passed last spring. This was one of the priority bills that the Accelerator worked on in conjunction with our coalition, the Renewable Heat Now campaign. It requires that new construction be built without on-site fossil fuel combustion after December 2025. That's 7 stories and shorter. And then in a couple years after that, we'll do 7 stories and above. The reason I'm using it is because it's a nice example of how the legislative, budgetary, and regulatory processes all sort of work together. And then we'll talk about our Advocacy Accelerators program, and then we'll get to Sarah, who will take you through Advocacy 101 and how important your role is in talking to legislators. And then we'll end with some nice actions that you can take right away. First, a little lingo. I use the word advocate. I don't use the word lobby. Partially, well, mostly because the word lobby can throw up red flags, especially for grant makers at the state level. And so the word advocate is a little bit less touchy. So that's just the reason why I use the word advocate. The Accelerator is a 501c3, so we're a nonprofit, and I am not a registered lobbyist. So those are the reasons why you'll hear me use the word advocate. I know a lot of people in our field use the word lobby, though, so don't stress if you're not changing your lingo. I just want to explain why I'm using the word advocate. And then I will also be using the word policy, and that is used to denote both legislative, so laws and bills, but also regulation. Right? So why are we even here? I assume that most of you are pretty passionate about working on to address climate change. And because climate change is so intersectional and requires systems level change, we at the Accelerator feel that policy change is a very impactful way to address the climate crisis. And we need policy change to meet the goals in both our regional climate action strategy, as well as the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, or sometimes better known as the New York State Climate Law. These are just a few of the mandates in the law. It's not an exhaustive list, but these are the mandates that the law says we're supposed to have these things by these dates. And we need additional laws to actually make that a reality. So everything that the Accelerator prioritizes is moving us towards both the vision of a thriving region, which is laid out in the climate action strategy, as well as in helping the state meet the mandates of the CLCPA. Just like in the federal government, we have three branches. There's the executive, which is made up of the governor and the lieutenant governor. So Governor Hochul and Lieutenant Governor Delgado. And then there's the folks in the governor's office. You might hear sometimes the terms executive chamber to refer to the governor's office, and sometimes the term second floor, which really refers to the fact that her office is physically on the second floor of this building, which is the Capitol building in Albany. And the executive branch also includes state agencies and state departments, like the Department of Environmental Conservation or the DEC. So that's very involved in our work too, as I assume that you can imagine. So the DEC, and then like the Department of Public Service, which I'll talk to you more about in just a second, because it has to do with one of the commissions that we work, or that our work crosses paths with. There's also the legislative branch, and that in New York State is made up of the Assembly and the New York State Senate. Every one of us as New Yorkers are represented by one Assembly member and one New York State Senator. The New York State Senator is different and easily confused with the US Senators, who we have two of, and they represent the whole state in DC. So Senator Gillibrand and Schumer. There's 63 New York State senators and 150 Assembly members. So the Assembly takes way longer to deal with stuff because they have way more people. And their districts are smaller in general and have fewer people, or smaller physically usually. And the 63 senators, if you remember that there are 62 New York State counties, there's one more senator than county. Then there's also the judicial branch, which is less relevant to our current work most of the time, though some of the laws that have been passed are being tried in New York State courts. So it is important to keep an eye on who is in charge in the courts. And our Attorney General is Letitia James. She is another elected official, just like the governor and the lieutenant governor. and the comptroller of New York, who the whole state votes for. So there's the 4 leadership positions that the whole state votes for. The assembly members and the senators are just voted for by the people in their districts. So there are also a bunch of public authorities that were all started at different times under different governors who had way different styles. They're all have different governance structures and funding mechanisms. It's a little bit bonkers, I think. But the ones that are most relevant to our work, some of the ones that are most relevant to our work are the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, or NYSERDA. And the NYSERDA, for instance, is governed by a board of, I believe, 13 people, and some of them are ex officio, so they stay that way. I think the commissioner of the PSC is one of the people who's always on that board, and the commissioner of the DEC, which is always on that board. I forgot to tell you that the commissioners of the state departments, who are in charge of the departments, are all appointed by the governor. So are most of the members of NYSERDA's board. And so you can probably see a pattern that the governor has quite a lot of power in choosing who the leadership is at the state level. Then we have the New York Power Authority, and were created by legislation in the 1930s, and they operate hydroelectric plants in the St. Lawrence Seaway and Niagara Falls. They fund themselves through like the sale of bonds, as does NYSERDA. NYSERDA also funds itself through the Clean Energy Fund, which we all, as ratepayers, pay into with the systems benefit charge on our utility bills. So NYPA, the New York Public Power Authority, pardon me, has been given through the Build Public Renewables Act, which was passed last year. Some of you may have heard of it. Several of you worked on it last year. That bill expands the capacity for NYPA to build new renewable energy generation. And then lastly, one of the groups that is really important to our work is the Public Service Commission, or PSC. They are an arm of the Department of Public Service, so that's under the executive branch, and they regulate utilities, set rates for our services like gas and electric. They also deal with water and cell phone service, not cell phone service, telephone service, and I think internet. When you hear people at the Accelerator mentioning rate cases, we're talking about a administrative law case that goes through the Department of Public Service staff. They are the ones who will sort of deal with all of the regular court case stuff. And then the PSC, the commission, will make the final call on whatever the outcome of the case is. And the members of the commission are appointed by the governor, as you probably guessed. So New York State is maybe kind of special in that we legislate through the budget, or we are able to legislate through the budget. We don't have to, but many people like to because it's sort of a simpler step. We kind of get everything in the budget, have everybody agree on it, and have it all voted on. This means that bills that don't necessarily have fiscal implications can be passed through via the budget. And that's why I have everything crammed into one slide. The whole process starts in the spring, even though the actual official legislative session just started this week. The legislative session runs from January to June. And that's when legislators are actually in Albany debating bills, et cetera. But the whole process starts much earlier when the agencies and the governor are coming up with their legislative and budgetary priorities in as early as sometimes the spring beforehand. And many of you may have helped advocate in the fall to try to influence the governor to get her to add priorities to her executive budget. So it's a great time to do that. And then in next week, the governor will unveil her priorities in the State of the State speech, which is happening on January 9th. You can sign up. It's usually broadcast via Zoom if you want to hear all about her big pomp and circumstance. She usually, they like to do that. They just did a teaser, and you get to hear what her priorities are for the year. Then after that is another great time to advocate. In the beginning of February, budget hearings are held by committee, and the committees are focused on certain areas like environmental conservation or health and human services. Like they have different budgetary hearings on different subjects. And that's when agencies, state agencies, and advocates can talk directly to senators and assembly members and talk about what their priorities are, what they want to see, what they might need in terms of budget. And then all of the assembly members and all of the senators go together in conference and deliberate on what they want to prioritize in their, quote, one house budgets. These are so the Senate has a version of their ideal budget, the Assembly has a version of their ideal budget, and they usually submit them or release them in mid-March. And then it's the period of time where the leadership of the Senate, the Assembly, and the governor's office all get together to hash out the differences between these three ideal budgets. This used to be called the 3 men in a room phase, but now it's 2 women and 1 man in a room because we have a female governor and a female head of the New York State Senate. They are supposed to have a budget to be voted on by April 1st. This doesn't always happen. Last year, it was a month late and nothing else got done during the month of April. So we're supposed to have the budget done by April, and then the next 3 months focusing on other legislation. So at all of these points, there are opportunities for advocacy, and it sometimes changes so quickly, we might, or I might send everybody a emergency, everybody has to call the Speaker of the Assembly, Carl Hastie, because he can make a decision about whether a bill comes to the floor. And maybe it's gone through committees and a bunch of Assembly members agree on it and like it, but Speaker Hastie has the ultimate call on whether it comes to the floor for a whole vote. And so we want to make sure that we're nimble in this period of time and can do a bunch of different actions. Really quickly, rulemaking is just to implement New York State law. So I talked about the All Electric Building Act. That was passed through the budget last year. And even though it is law, it's not been implemented yet because the Building Code Council has not added the requirements to the energy code yet. And hopefully they'll do that at their next meeting when they unveil the new code. We'll see. So the All Electric Building Act was one of those non-fiscal bills that got passed through the budget and now needs to be implemented through the regulatory process. I don't have time to talk about it right now, but Cap and Invest is also a rulemaking process that we are following. These are our two statewide coalitions. The New York Renews. New York Renews is more economy-wide. Renewable Heat Now, as you can guess, is focused on providing affordable clean energy for homes. Both of these coalitions prioritize New York Heat. And New York Heat is going to be one of our biggest focuses for this upcoming year. We took the climate action strategy that the Accelerator created a couple years ago and are focusing our advocacy efforts on the top 3 emitting sectors in the region, which were identified in that climate action strategy. And so that's transportation, building, and agriculture are the 3 top emitting sectors in our region. And so we are focusing on policy that addresses those 3 sectors. And we couldn't do that effectively without also working to decarbonize and strengthen the electric grid. So those are the different policies that we are working on, and we are choosing to, in our policy work throughout, we strive to affirmatively benefit disadvantaged communities in addressing climate change. None of us at the Accelerator love the term disadvantaged communities, but it's in the CLCPA. So that's the term we use. And we look at policy to make sure that it does not negatively impact disadvantaged communities. All right, so how do we get there in 2024? How do we get to this vision that we want of a thriving region? And how do we get to the mandates of the CLCPA? These are some of the bills that we're working on, and I'm realizing that this is a lot of text. I'm so sorry. We've got the New York Heat Act and the Just Energy Transition Act. And I forgot this is a mistake on my part, the Climate Change Superfund Act. That's this Kruger and Dinowitz bill. Those 2, the Just Energy Transition Act and the Climate Change Superfund Act, are both priorities of New York Renews. And we also will be working on and keeping an eye on the Cap and Invest rulemaking, the NYSEG RG&E long-term gas planning process, and the new Efficiency New York process. If Katie is still here, she might not be. Oh, Katie, there you are. Sorry, I've scrolled farther down. If we have a brand new public policy or policy page on the Accelerator where you can find information on the CLCPA and links to the disadvantaged communities definition. You can also find our policy platform, the full thing, if you want to read it. It's a little over 1 page. And then our policy priorities thus far. Now, they might change. Hopefully, maybe we'll pass the New York Heat Act in the budget and we can take that off of our priority list. Or we might add a more ag-focused one in the future as we learn more about different bills that are being introduced. So check that out. And I will also be sending out links and the slide deck after we're done. So if you don't catch it right now, then you can catch it later in the email follow-up. I have just talked at you a whole bunch, and we're going to switch it over to Sarah to talk about effective advocacy. But I'm hoping that we can do a little bit of trivia. If you know your state assembly person and your New York State senator, put them in the chat. If you don't, no judgment whatsoever. There are easy places to find them. And I think that Katie just put the links to find your assembly person and your senator in the chat. So take a look, see who represents you at the state level. And I am going to stop sharing and turn the mic over to Sarah, unless we have some questions. I have not been looking at the chat at all.
We do.
All right.
Himanshu asked if the DEC, the Department of Environmental Conservation, was a public authority, or, okay, could you explain?
No, I know it's tricky, Himanshu. The differences are nuanced, I would say. The departments, I believe, are in the Constitution. It might have something to do with New York State Constitution. It also, New York State government is wonky. It's, you know, it's been around for quite a while. And I think I alluded to this before, but like the public authorities sometimes have been just changed or created almost like at a whim of a governor, or, you know, like they're like, oh, we want somebody to do this thing, so we're starting a public authority. And some of them have been around, like NYPA, have been around for decades, almost 100 years. So they've all had their opportunities to kind of grow and be weird and not all cohesive. That's my sort of take on it. The departments are much more official. The authorities can be created as needed, almost. That's not a particularly good answer to that question.
Were there any other questions, Katie, before I take over?
Not in the chat, but perhaps if anyone wanted to unmute and ask a question, I'm not sure if we have time, or should we just move on?
People can always email me or Slack me.
Hi, Claire. I have a question.
Hi, Paul. Yeah.
Hi. How many did you say were in New York State? 62?
There's 62 counties and then 63 senators.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, I will jump in then. Definitely, if you do have other questions for Claire, like she said, reach out or drop them in the chat, and we can loop back. But we will jump in. So, you know, Claire gave us really good context, you know, understanding that behind the scenes, what happens in Albany. And so my chunk of tonight will be talking about where do we fit as citizens, as volunteers, what is our role in all of that. And so just to start, I'm Sarah Mittiga from Citizens Climate Lobby. We do have lobby in our title, but you know, so we call it lobbying. But you know, definitely, you know, when Claire's talking about advocacy or lobbying, it's all the same thing. It's sitting down with our policymakers in a meeting, having a conversation, building a relationship, and trying to move things forward in a mutual way. So, I will be talking more about my experience as a volunteer with Citizens Climate Lobby. We're a national, nonpartisan, grassroots organization. Our focus is on empowering citizens, volunteers like us to connect with our policymakers and move policy forward. We mostly focus at the federal level, so if I'm sharing examples, it'll probably be about my experience with our federal legislatures, either meeting in DC or on Zoom or in district. But we also do some work at the state level, so I'll have examples there too. And really, whether it's federal, state, local, meeting with your town board, all the concepts are the same. The ideas of how to have these conversations and how to make it successful. So what I'll be talking about tonight, starting with the why. What's the point? Why bother advocating? Talk about what does that look like to actually be demonstrating our political will. Then we'll, kind of the biggest chunk of time, I think we'll be talking about what does that advocacy meeting look like. We'll walk through a sample meeting plan. I know from when people were dropping in the chat, and I know I've lobbied with many of you, so I know many of you have plenty of experience, more than I do. But we'll take a look at what that can look like, just as an example, and especially if you're newer to it, take some of the intimidation factor out of it. And then look at some do's and don'ts to get a better sense of what that really looks like in practice. So to start, why? What's the point? Why do we advocate to our policymakers? And really, this is the whole point here. Like, if there's one thing you remember from my part tonight, it's this: politicians don't create political will; they respond to it. And so, if we think about what does that mean for us, where does that political will come from? It comes from us, so that's kind of telling us it's our job. We need to be working together. We need to become such a powerful collective voice that our representatives just have no choice but to listen to us and to respond to that political will that we're showing. And so what does that mean? I keep saying political will and demonstrating political will. What does that really look like? What does that mean in practice? I know many of you have done many of these things, so you can either unmute, call out, drop in the chat. What are some examples that you've experienced or you've seen for demonstrating political will? And I know you guys know this. All right, we're seeing some in the chat: postcards, rallies, petitions, protests, phone calls. Absolutely. Yeah, keep them coming, and I will, we've hit most of them, but I'll run through. There we go. So yeah, phone calls, emails, letters, postcards, speaking at town hall meetings, rallies, like we said, press conferences, submitting public comments or speaking at public hearings, and then sitting down at lobby meetings. I'm seeing some more good ones pop up in the chat: social media, donations. Yeah, that is definitely, monetary political will. So yeah, there's lots of different things that this can look like. And definitely throughout your time as a climate advocate, I'm sure you've already or will be hearing different calls to, hey, we're going to do a call-in day, or hey, we need people to speak at the county legislator meeting coming up. So there's all sorts of different opportunities and ways to find what works for you. Also, you might be someone who wants to be out in front, marching in front of City Hall, or you might be someone who wants to practice your script and then make a phone call, or sit down and in an advocacy meeting. So let's see. There we go. So zeroing in then on that one specific, what does an advocacy meeting look like? Like I said, I know sounds like and I know a lot of you have done lobbying. I lobbied with some of you just today. So, but if you're like me, something like this is out of your comfort zone. Even though I'm the one doing this presentation, I still get nervous before every lobby meeting and way over prepare for it. So I'm not the expert, but I'm the expert in being worried and wanting to make sure I do it right. So, and I say right, but there's no wrong way to do this. But I will share and I'm still sharing. Yes. So this is our sample meeting plan for Citizens Climate Lobby. We're planners. We overplan. Not all organizations go into this level of prep and detail before an advocacy meeting, and that's absolutely okay. Those work and run perfectly well. But I think it helps as you're trying to visualize what it can look like to walk through something a little bit more detailed like this. And so, you know, when kind of big picture, when you're thinking about this advocacy meeting, really the key is remembering you're building a relationship. You know, if you're at a march or a rally, you know, you're symbolically like taking a political figure to task, and you know that is your job when you're you know, at an event like that. But when you're sitting down in a meeting, that's not your job. Your job is not to tisk and yell at them. It's to build a relationship, find common ground, find ways that you can agree and move things forward together. So really that theme of relationship building is the key thing to remember when you're thinking about having an effective meeting. For me, I think the key thing, if you only do one thing before the meeting, it's thinking about the goals. Before you go into the meeting, you want to know why. What am I trying to get out of this? What am I trying to communicate? What am I asking them to do? Not just like, what am I telling them, but what actions am I asking this policymaker to take, and wanting to make that really clear to them and make that a clear ask. And also, what are you trying to learn from them? You know, this is a relationship, it's a conversation. And so you're wanting to make sure that when you're going into a meeting, you're not doing all the talking. You know, your group wants to communicate what you want to communicate, but you also want to hear from that representative. So brainstorming those things in advance, making sure everyone's on board with what the goals are is important. At CCL, we always like to assign out the roles, just make sure that's clear. And for people who are newer, make sure they know, like, okay, I have a piece in this. This is my task. This is what I'm preparing for. Meeting lead is the person who kind of steers the conversation, facilitates things, not necessarily, and usually not the person who does all the talking or knows all the things, but just the person who's kind of keeping the threads together, and especially keeping those goals in mind and steering the conversation back towards those goals, and keeping it within the timestamp as well. We like to designate someone to be that asker so that we really make sure that for all the good conversation and relationship building we're having, there's at least one person who's like, okay, here's what we're here asking you to do. So making sure that comes through loud and clear. We always assign a note taker, not necessary, but especially for us, because we're not seeing this as a one and done conversation. It's going to be, you know, we know we're going to be coming back later, 6 months, a year later. We want to remember what we talked about, remember what the conversation was, so we can move that same conversation forward rather than going in again and having the same conversation over again. So that's why one of the reasons why the notes are important. Appreciation and follow-up I'll talk about when we get down to the agenda. If your meeting is on Zoom, which the last few years, boy, a lot of them were on Zoom. Now it's, you know, some are in person, some are on Zoom. Definitely some conveniences to doing the virtual meetings. And if you have one of those, it's always smart to assign a tech co-host, someone who can be in the background, comfortable with, you know, muting and dealing with the waiting room, things like that, so that the meeting can move forward, even if there's some tech things, you know, that you have someone tasked with behind the scenes. As far as the agenda and what that looks like, you know, we always start with just super quick, but as soon as we sit down, we like to say, how much time do you have for us today? Just making sure that, you know, one, it shows we're respectful of the person's time. And also, you know, if they surprise us and we thought we had 30 minutes and they say, you know what, I'm running late, got a bus to catch, I have 10 minutes, we can real quickly, you know, retool our plan and narrow down to, okay, what was that one goal? What was that one ask we wanted to make sure we got out, and make sure that we use that time that we do have. We always go around and do introductions. We keep these brief, you know, just who you are, where you're from. introductions, even if each person takes, 2-3 minutes, that takes up your your whole meeting if you have a handful of volunteers there. So we try to keep those brief so that we can really jump into the meat of the meeting. The appreciation is something that at CCL we always like to start with an appreciation, and it really can, it's something where you're just thanking them for something they've done, something that, a bill that they've co-sponsored, something they've done in the community. So many of our policymakers only hear from people to be yelled at, to be told, you need to do more, you're not doing enough, why did you do this? And so for them to just hear some genuine appreciation from their constituents for all the hard work that they do, whether we agree with them on 90% of the issues or not, there's always something that we can find. Sometimes you have to dig deeper than others, but we can always find something that we can offer some genuine appreciation for, and it really does change the tone of the meeting. Especially when you're meeting maybe with a Republican representative might really have their guard up, like, okay, these people are here to yell at me. The environmentalists don't want to partner with me, and then to start with that appreciation really changes that whole feel. So then, all of that takes 2-3 minutes to get through that intro stuff. Same with, a quick why we're here, overview of the meeting. The last thing you want is the person you're talking to spend the whole time wondering, what is the point? Why are they here? Like, they're just, giving me information. I don't know what they're asking me to do. So we always like to lay that out right up front, so it's super clear. And so we can spend productive time working towards those things. It's the basic stuff of actually getting to the meat of the conversation. So introducing our legislation, having that conversation, making our ask. We make a really big point of asking open-ended questions. So to the point that we brainstorm them in advance. We have some kind of default ones. And then as we think about our goals, we think about, okay, what are some of the questions we can be asking to get at some of those goals, to get the information that we're looking for, to understand what their hesitancy or barriers might be as far as moving with our legislation or what we're proposing. And so making a point of making sure that we're asking questions that are going to elicit feedback from them, that we're going to not do all the talking, basically. So, and then closing, making sure we have someone designated to follow up. If we said, okay, we'll get back to you with that, we want to make sure that we summarize that and get back to with timely information for that. So that's the meeting in a nutshell. Jumping back over here, we'll take a look at some advocacy myths, because sometimes the best way to think about what you should do is to think about what you shouldn't do. So, so we'll walk through just a couple of these before we close out on this section. First one is thinking that we need to be experts, especially us as citizen advocates. We're not there to be the experts. We're not experts on economic policy or, solar energy or any of those things. We're just representing ourselves, representing our communities. And that's all we need to do. I know your greatest friend is the response. Great question. I'll get back to you. And that's all you need. You don't need to know everything. You just need to be receptive, jotting down notes, making sure your note takers taking note on what those questions are, and having the confidence to just move that forward. Next myth is the idea of thinking that you have to be aggressive in order to be powerful. So that if you have a really important message, you need to come across with that passion and aggression. And like I said earlier, like if you're at a march or a rally, that kind of in your face, more aggressive approach, it's really important. Like that's how you get media attention. That's like a crucial part of activism. And, it's an important tactic. But when you're sitting down at an advocacy meeting, when you're sitting down in an office, that's not your role at that time. You're there, again, to build that relationship and to, have polite, respectful conversation. Let's see. Another myth is the idea that meeting with staff is a waste of time. I know sometimes if you're scheduling a meeting and you're like, oh, I couldn't even get a meeting with the representative. They brushed me off. I'm meeting with their staff member. No. That if you think about it, the representative, they have an awful lot of issues they're dealing with. They're doing a lot of meet and greets and building those relationships. It's the staffers who are understanding the ins and outs of policies, reading all the bills, writing up summaries, recommendations, and putting them on the representative's desk. So if you are talking to the staffer, that is exactly the person you want to be talking to. Those can be really great conversations and really move things forward. And it's just as important to build a relationship with those staff members as it is with the representatives. Even knowing, the staff members, they may go on to be representatives later in their careers or working for other offices. I know we've had a lot of examples in Citizens Climate Lobby where a group might go to meet with their new representative and their staff, and the staff already knows all about them because they worked for a different representative, and they're like, oh, Citizens Climate Lobby, love you guys, loved the chapter back in Charleston. So those can be really great, fruitful relationships as well. Another myth, like I said, we're a nonpartisan organization, and so we work with who's in office, and so the idea that no point in talking to Republicans, they won't be interested, and no point in talking to the Democrats, they're already on board, but their hands are tied, they can't do anything. With that logic, you wouldn't be talking to anybody, and definitely, what you see in the news, they want to present it as this very divisive issue, and two sides. But knowing that, there are Republicans who are willing to take action on climate. I think it's up to 32 Republicans in the federal bipartisan climate solutions caucus. Locally, I know our team in Penfield got an all-Republican town board to partner with them on several different climate issues. So no need to brush someone off based on their political party. Another myth, I kind of talked about this when we were going through the meeting plan, thinking that your only goal there is to share your own points. It's time to listen. You want to be thinking about, what can I be learning? What can I be hearing from this, either the representative or the staffer? We go so far to, at Citizens Climate Lobby, we will tally up how many questions we ask, estimate, what percentage of time were we talking versus listening, and really making a point of making that space to make that an equal conversation. And then the last one, as far as the myths that I like to close on, is that kind of defeatist idea that I know we have all felt, me included, is like, what's the point? We can't influence our policymakers. And so this is a quote for myself that I often come back to and like to share. And so it reads, optimism is a political act. Those who benefit from the status quo are perfectly happy for us to think nothing is going to get any better. In fact, these days, cynicism is obedience. And so I'll leave it at that. That says it better than anything I can say. But just, knowing that we all have a role. So we'll jump ahead then to your next steps, what it's going to look like for you to be a climate advocate in 2024. I'll cover a couple of these and then hand it over to Claire to cover a couple. Claire posed that question to the group asking if you knew your state assembly, your state senator. There's a whole slew of representatives from local, state to national level. So my challenge to you is to get this link, print this out, fill it out, look up who is your city council, town board, when do they meet, where do they meet, what's the contact information for my county legislator. Fill all this in, print it out, put it on your fridge, put the phone numbers in your phone so that when there's a call-in day, it's super easy for you to make those phone calls, and put those, town board and county legislator meetings, put them on your calendar. That way they're just in there every month. And so you can really be making this part of your daily, monthly habits as you move forward. There's a link here for helping look up. It, I think, includes most of these different representatives at that one link. It goes to the Monroe County Board of Elections. That ties to the next one, which is the Town Board Challenge. If you've never been to a town board meeting, city council meeting, county legislature meeting, go to one this month or next month. Even if you're not going to speak or speak out on an issue, just go, see what it's like, see how it works. Again, me being, someone who likes to know out of my comfort zone, what's it going to look like, get a feel for what it will look like. So that way, when you get an email from Claire in a month or two saying, hey, we need people to speak at, the Henrietta Town Board, you Henrietta residents are ready, you've seen it, you know what it's like, and you're have the confidence to jump in and do it. So that's all for me. I'm going to turn it over to Claire to cover these next few opportunities.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Before I do that, there's a couple good questions in the chat for you. And I was in the middle of sort of responding to Joanne's, but I know there was a question. Oh yeah, Joanne asked about recording meetings, either video or audio, instead of taking notes. If have you ever done that? My feeling would be maybe not, but yeah, maybe I'm wrong.
Because again, we're building a relationship, and we do really try to value the confidentiality of the meeting. So even if we're bringing a laptop in just to take notes on, we'll usually ask, like, do you mind if I have the laptop out? So yeah, I would say even if you're on Zoom, like, rather than record, like, treat it like a conversation, and then have that designated note taker jotting things down, and then we'll usually like debrief right after so we can catch anything that, oh, I didn't hear that, what bill were they talking about, and kind of fill in the details. And usually between the group of you, you can remember it all.
Yeah, and I find that the notes don't always have to be super detailed. Like, it doesn't have to be everybody's back and forth, but highlights like they committed to X, Y, and Z, or they were like, nope, I can't do this. Or if they have specific questions about how a bill works and they want to know more, and you need to go back and figure that out. Those are the kinds of things that you can put in the notes. And then there was another question from Joanne. How do you get past a gatekeeper / staff member when they turn you down? I'm assuming you mean for like a meeting, Joanne.
Yeah, a phrase we use a lot at Citizens Climate Lobby is polite persistence. So that's the short answer to your question. At least in my experience, like we haven't been turned down more so than feeling we're being ignored. You send that email, never hear back. And I think part of it is just not taking it personally, and just knowing they're super busy, the staffers, and knowing that, all right, let me send another email in a couple days. Let me put a note on my calendar. I'll call the office, make sure I'm sending it to the right person. And it can take a while, definitely sometimes, to get the meeting scheduled. But I think as long as you, keep that air of polite persistence, that you're a friendly voice, but you're not going to go away. That has worked for us so far.
Another thing I was thinking of is if the office is not one of your actual reps, maybe bringing in a friend who is a constituent to make the ask could also be helpful.
Definitely. Yeah. Having even if, but yeah, sometimes you have that expert who knows what they're talking about, who you want to be at the meeting. They don't have to be a constituent, but yeah, having some constituents there and to make those requests can go a long way.
I hope that answered your questions, Joanne. And thank you, Himanshu, for helping answer Joanne's questions. Awesome. So I think a bunch of you are already signed up for our Climate Advocacy Network. But if you're not, we'd love to have you sign up. We're using the volunteer sign up form for this. So you could actually, I can't remember how Abby does the two, instead of saying kill two birds with one stone, we feed two birds with one crumb, something like that. It's the less violent way of saying that. So if you aren't part of the Climate Advocacy Network and you're not getting regular emails from me about actions to take, both Renewable Heat Now and New York Renews, I do it all and try to add in some fun updates when I can. So if you're not signed up for that yet, and maybe you're not signed up for a Color Your Community Green team, you can do both things on that same volunteer sign up form that Katie just put in the chat. If you're interested in the Climate Advocacy Network, make sure you check mobilization and policy advocacy. I think that's what it says. And then you can also start your own Color Your Community Green group if you don't have one already. And lastly, we are going to Albany on Tuesday, January 23rd. And it will be all about New York Heat. The New York Heat Act is pretty transformative.